She sat in that cold interview room for 3 hours before she finally spoke. Her hands trembled as she clutched a tissue she'd twisted into pieces. The detective across from her leaned forward, his voice gentle, patient, waiting. And when Priscilla finally opened her mouth, the words that came out silenced everyone in that room. She told them about the home she lived in, the people she called family, and the horror that happened behind closed doors. For years, she carried a secret so unbearable that even now, hearing it makes your stomach turn. A secret born inside the very home she was meant to feel safe in. The place where a young woman should dream about her future, plan her goals, laugh with people she loves. Instead, Priscilla learned to lock her bedroom door at night, to avoid eye contact at the dinner table, to become invisible in her own house. And the worst part? The people who should have protected her were the ones she needed protection from. If you think no family could ever do this, if you believe a mother would always choose her child, you'll want to stay till the end. Because Priscilla's story will shatter everything you thought you knew about family, about trust, about silence. Share this story because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is living it right now. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Back to when Priscilla was just a 24-year-old woman trying to build a life for herself, trying to figure out who she was, unaware that the nightmare was already unfolding around her. Priscilla grew up like most kids, nothing unusual, nothing that would make you think her life would turn into what it became. She was smart, the kind of girl who made decent grades without trying too hard, who had a small circle of close friends, who loved reading and listening to music in her room. Her real father left when she was 9 years old. She barely remembered him, just fragments, the smell of his cologne, the sound of his laugh. After he left, it was just Priscilla and her mother, Linda, for a few years. They were close back then. Linda worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, and Priscilla learned early how to take care of herself, how to cook simple meals, how to do laundry, how to be independent. When Priscilla was 14, Linda met Thomas. He seemed nice enough at first, polite, well-dressed, always smiling. He worked in sales, made good money, and within a year he moved into their small apartment. Within a year, they were married. Priscilla didn't mind at first. Thomas brought stability. Her mother seemed happier, less stressed about bills. He had a son from a previous relationship, a boy named Ethan, who was 12 when they all moved into a bigger house together, a 3-bedroom place in a quiet neighborhood with good schools. For the first couple of years, everything seemed normal. Thomas provided for the family, Linda quit one of her jobs, Priscilla focused on finishing high school, then enrolled in community college, studying business administration. She worked part-time at a bookstore to save money, dreaming of transferring to a 4-year university one day. But somewhere around the time Priscilla turned 19, things started to shift. It was subtle at first, so subtle she couldn't even name it. Thomas began making comments about her appearance, how she dressed, how she wore her hair. At first, Priscilla thought he was just being fatherly, protective, but the comments felt off, too personal, too lingering. He'd watch her walk through the living room, his eyes following her in a way that made her skin crawl. He'd stand too close when they talked, invade her personal space, touch her shoulder or her back when there was no reason to.
Priscilla tried to brush it off. She told herself she was overreacting, being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. She started avoiding him. staying in her room more, taking extra shifts at work, spending time at friends' houses. When she had to be home, she made sure she was never alone with him. She'd wait until her mother was around, or Ethan, anyone. The tension in the house grew thick, suffocating. Priscilla stopped talking as much at dinner. She stopped making eye contact. She became a ghost in her own home, drifting through hallways, locking her door at night, checking it twice, 3 times before she could even think about sleeping. And her mother, Linda, noticed the change, but she didn't ask the right questions. She chalked it up to Priscilla being moody, stressed about school, going through something. Whenever Priscilla tried to hint that something felt wrong, Linda would wave it off. She'd say things like, "Thomas is just trying to be a good father figure," or, "You're too sensitive, honey. He doesn't mean anything by it." The dismissals hurt more than the discomfort itself. By the time Priscilla turned 22, she'd learned to live in a constant state of vigilance. She planned her days around avoiding Thomas. She knew his work schedule, knew when he'd be home, knew which rooms to avoid and when. Ethan, now 17, had grown distant too, sullen and angry, always locked in his room playing video games or out with friends. Priscilla didn't think much about it. Teenagers were moody. That's what everyone said. But sometimes, late at night, she'd hear Ethan and Thomas arguing through the walls, muffled voices rising and falling, doors slamming. She never knew what they fought about, and she never asked. She had enough to worry about. The worst part was the isolation. Priscilla couldn't talk to anyone about what she felt. How do you explain a feeling? How do you tell someone that your stepfather makes you uncomfortable without sounding dramatic or ungrateful? He'd never touched her inappropriately, never said anything overtly wrong. It was all subtext, all implication, all in the way he looked at her, the way he lingered, the way he made her feel small and trapped. So Priscilla stayed silent. And then one night in late September, everything changed. Priscilla came home from her evening shift at the bookstore around 9:30. The house was quiet. Her mother's car wasn't in the driveway. Linda was working a late shift at the hospital where she'd taken a job as an administrative assistant. Ethan's car was gone too. He was probably out with friends. That left Thomas. Priscilla's heart sank. She thought about getting back in her car and driving somewhere, anywhere, just to kill time until someone else came home. But she was exhausted, bone tired, and she had an exam the next morning. She needed the study. She needed to sleep.
So she unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The living room was dark except for the glow of the television. Thomas was on the couch, a beer in his hand, watching some action movie. He turned his head when she walked in, smiled, that slow, unnerving smile. "Hey, Priscilla," he said, his voice too casual, too friendly. "Long day?" She nodded, barely looking at him. "Yeah, I've got studying to do. Good night." She turned toward the hallway, toward the safety of her room. "Hold on," Thomas said. She froze. "Come sit for a minute. We never talk anymore." Priscilla's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, to ignore him, to lock herself away. But she also knew that refusing him, making it obvious she was avoiding him, could make things worse. She learned that over the years. So she hesitated, just for a second, and that second was enough. Thomas patted the couch beside him. "Just for a minute," he said again. "Your mom's always working, Ethan's never around. Feels like we're strangers in our own house." Priscilla swallowed hard. She stayed standing near the hallway, arms crossed over her chest. "I really need to study, Thomas. I have an exam tomorrow." He shrugged, took a sip of his beer. 5 minutes won't kill you." The way he said it, so calm, so matter-of-fact, made it clear he wasn't asking, he was telling. Priscilla felt her stomach twist. She glanced at the door, calculating. Could she just leave? Go back to her car, drive to the library? But that would mean explaining herself, defending her choice, and Thomas had a way of twisting things, of making her feel guilty for wanting space. So she sat down, not next to him, but on the armchair across from the couch, as far away as she could get while still technically obeying. Thomas seemed satisfied with that. He turned back to the television, took another sip of his beer. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the sounds of gunfire and explosions filling the room. Priscilla's leg bounced nervously. She kept her eyes on the screen, not really watching, just waiting for an opportunity to excuse herself. "You've been distant lately," Thomas said, suddenly his eyes still on the TV. Priscilla's breath caught. "I've just been busy. School, work, you know." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know. But it feels like more than that. Feels like you're avoiding me." Her heart pounded. "I'm not avoiding anyone." Thomas finally turned to look at her, and there was something in his eyes, something cold and calculating, that made her blood run cold. "You sure about that?" Priscilla stood up abruptly. "I really need to go study." She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned and walked quickly down the hallway, her hands trembling. She heard him call after her, something she couldn't make out, but she didn't stop. She reached a room, slipped inside, and locked the door behind her. She leaned against it, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. That night, Priscilla barely slept. Every creak of the house made her jump. Every sound outside her door made her heart race. She kept the light on, kept her phone next to her pillow, ready to call someone, anyone, if she needed to. But who would she call? Her mother wouldn't believe her. Her friends wouldn't understand. And what would she even say? My stepfather makes me uncomfortable? That wasn't enough. That wasn't proof. That wasn't anything. The next morning, she left for her exam before anyone else woke up. She spent the whole day on campus, in the library, in coffee shops, anywhere but home.
For the next few weeks, Priscilla did everything she could to avoid being alone with Thomas again. She coordinated her schedule with her mother's, made sure she was never home when Limba wasn't. She started staying at the library until late, sometimes until it closed. She picked up extra shifts at work, anything to minimize her time in that house. But the more she avoided him, the more Thomas seemed to notice her. He started texting her, asking where she was, when she'd be home, if she needed a ride. At first, the texts seemed harmless, almost fatherly, but they came too often, at odd hours, and the tone felt off. One night, around 11, Priscilla's phone buzzed while she was studying at the library. It was Thomas. "Where are you?" She hesitated, then typed back, "Library, studying." His response came quickly. "It's late. I'll come pick you up." Priscilla's chest tightened. "I'm okay. I'll drive myself home soon." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he sent, "I'm already on my way." Panic surged through her. She grabbed her things and left the library immediately, practically running to her car. She drove home as fast as she could, praying she'd get there before Thomas left. When she pulled into the driveway, his truck was still there. She exhaled, relieved. She hurried inside, barely acknowledging him as he stood by the door with his keys in hand. "You didn't have to rush," he said, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. "I said I'd pick you up." "I had my car," Priscilla said, brushing past him. "Didn't make sense for you to drive out." Thomas watched her for a long moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself." But Priscilla could feel his gaze on her back as she walked down the hallway. She could feel the weight of it, the possessiveness, the control. She locked her door and sat on her bed, her heart racing. Something was building. She could feel it in the air, in the tension that filled every room of that house. Something was coming, and she didn't know how to stop it. A few days later, Priscilla's best friend, a girl named Casey, noticed something was wrong. They were having lunch together on campus, and Casey kept glancing at Priscilla with concern. "You okay?" Casey asked. "You seem off lately." Priscilla stirred her coffee, not meeting her friend's eyes. "I'm fine, just tired." Casey wasn't convinced. You're always tired. You're always stressed. When's the last time you actually relaxed? Priscilla tried to laugh it off. I don't know. Life's just a lot right now. Casey leaned forward, her voice gentle. Is it your stepdad? Priscilla's head snapped up. What? Casey hesitated. You never talk about him. And whenever you mention going home, you look like you'd rather be anywhere else. Priscilla's throat tightened. She wanted to tell Casey everything, wanted to pour out all the fear and discomfort and confusion she'd been carrying for years. But the words wouldn't come. How do you explain a feeling? How do you make someone understand when you don't even fully understand it yourself? Before we dive deeper, I'd like to take a moment to speak from the heart. Creating these stories isn't as easy as it might look. It takes time, deep research, and real resources to find true cases like this, stories that need to be told but are often buried or ignored. We pay for research tools, archive access, and editing software to bring these true stories to you with the sensitivity they deserve.
Sometimes we go a week or more without posting, not because we've run out of cases, but because we're trying to manage the little we have to keep this work going. So if you believe in what we're doing, if you think shining light on hidden abuse stories is worth supporting, you can send us a small gift or show love in any way you can. Every little bit helps us keep raising awareness, one story at a time. Priscilla finally shook her head. It's nothing, really. I'm just being paranoid. But Casey didn't look convinced. If something's wrong, you can tell me. You know that, right? Priscilla nodded, forcing a smile. I know, but I'm okay. I promise. It was another lie, and with every lie she told, the secret grew heavier. That same week, something shifted in Ethan. He'd always been withdrawn, but lately he seemed angrier, more volatile. Priscilla heard him and Thomas arguing more frequently, the fights escalating into shouting matches. One night, she heard something crash, glass shattering. Her mother rushed out of the bedroom, ran down the hallway. What's going on? Linda's voice was sharp, panicked. Priscilla heard Thomas's voice, calm and cold. He's out of control. Broke a picture frame. I was just trying to talk to him. Ethan's voice was raw, desperate. You're a liar. You're a fucking liar. Priscilla's blood went cold. She stayed in her room, door locked, listening. Linda tried to mediate, to calm Ethan down, but he stormed out of the house, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The house fell silent. Priscilla sat on her bed, her mind racing. What was Ethan talking about? What was Thomas lying about? She thought about going out there, asking questions, but fear kept her frozen. The next morning, Ethan was gone. He'd packed a bag and left sometime during the night. Linda was frantic, calling his phone over and over, but he didn't answer. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee, looking unbothered. He'll come back, he said casually. He just needs to cool off. But Ethan didn't come back. Not that day, not the next. A week went by, then 2. Linda filed a missing persons report, but the police said Ethan was 17, almost an adult, and there was no sign of foul play. He'd left on his own. There was nothing they could do. Priscilla watched her mother fall apart. Linda cried every night, blamed herself, wondered what she'd done wrong. Thomas comforted her, held her, whispered reassurances. And Priscilla felt a creeping dread settle over her. Because deep down, she knew. She knew why Ethan left. She knew what he'd been trying to say. And the worst part? She was next. It wasn't until one night in late October that everything Priscilla feared became real, and her world shattered in silence. It was a Thursday night. Priscilla remembered that detail because she turned in a major paper that afternoon and felt a small sense of accomplishment, a rare moment of relief. She came home around 8:30, later than usual. The house was quiet. Her mother's car was gone. Linda had mentioned something that morning about working a double shift, covering for a coworker. Priscilla's stomach sunk when she realized Thomas would be home alone. She stood in the driveway for a long moment, debating whether to leave again, to go somewhere, anywhere. But exhaustion won. She was so tired of running, so tired of avoiding him. She told herself it would be fine. She'd go straight to her room, lock the door, put on headphones and disappear into her own world. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside.
The living room was dim, the only light coming from a lamp in the corner. Thomas was sitting on the couch, but he wasn't watching TV this time. He was just sitting there, hands folded in his lap, waiting. Priscilla froze. "Hey," Thomas said, his voice soft, too soft. "We need to talk." Priscilla's heart started to pound. "About what?" Thomas stood up slowly, took a step toward her. "About you. About us. About why you've been avoiding me." She backed toward the door. "I haven't been avoiding you. I've just been busy." He shook his head, a sad smile on his face. "Don't lie to me, Priscilla. I know when someone's lying." Her hand found the doorknob behind her, gripped it tightly. "I need to go." Thomas's expression darkened. "No, you don't. You need to stop running and talk to me like an adult." Priscilla's mind raced. She could leave. She could run to her car, drive away, call someone. But her keys were in her bag, and her bag was slung over her shoulder, and her hands were shaking so badly she wasn't sure she could even grip them. Thomas took another step closer. "I've been patient with you," he said, his voice calm, controlled. "I've tried to be understanding, but you make it so hard. You act like I'm some kind of monster." I don't think that," Priscilla stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, you do," Thomas said. "I can see it in your eyes, the way you look at me, the way you flinch when I get too close." He was right in front of her now, so close she could smell the beer on his breath. Priscilla's back was against the door, her hand still on the knob, frozen. "Please," she whispered, "just let me go to my room." Thomas reached out, touched her arm. His grip was gentle at first, almost tender. "Why are you so scared of me?" he asked, his voice soft, almost hurt. "I've never done anything to you. I've only ever tried to take care of you." Priscilla's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then his grip tightened. His other hand came up, cupped the side of her face. "You're so beautiful. Do you know that? So beautiful." Priscilla jerked her head away, tried to pull free, but his hand tightened on her arm, fingers digging in. "Don't," she managed to choke out. "Please don't." But Thomas wasn't listening. His eyes were glazed, distant, like he was somewhere else entirely. "I have been so patient," he murmured again. "So patient." What happened next unfolded in a blur of terror and helplessness. Priscilla tried to scream, but his hand clamped over her mouth. She tried to fight, but he was stronger, so much stronger. He dragged her away from the door, down the hallway, toward his bedroom. She clawed at his arms, kicked, struggled, but it didn't matter. Nothing she did mattered. And in the end, all she could do was close her eyes and disappear inside herself, to a place where none of this was real, where none of this was happening. When it was over, Thomas let her go. He stepped back, breathing hard, his expression unreadable. Priscilla collapsed to the floor, her whole body shaking, her mind blank. Thomas looked down at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away, back down the hallway, as if nothing had happened. Priscilla didn't know how long she stayed there, crumpled on the floor, unable to move, unable to think. Eventually, she forced herself to stand. Her legs barely supported her. She stumbled to the bathroom, locked the door, turned on the shower, and sat on the floor under the scalding water until it ran cold. She didn't cry. She couldn't. It was like all the emotion had been drained out of her, leaving behind only numbness. When she finally turned off the water and dried herself,
She moved like a robot, mechanical, detached. She went to her room, locked the door, and climbed into bed fully clothed. She stared at the ceiling, her mind empty, her body frozen. Hours passed. She heard her mother come home around 2 a.m, heard Linda's footsteps in the hallway, heard her bedroom door close. Priscilla didn't move, didn't sleep.
Just stared. The next morning, Priscilla called in sick to work. She couldn't face anyone, couldn't pretend to be normal. She stayed in her room all day, didn't eat, didn't drink, just lay there, staring at nothing. Her mother knocked on her door around noon. "Priscilla, are you okay? Thomas said you're not feeling well." Priscilla's stomach turned at the mention of his name. "I'm fine," she called out, her voice flat. "Just need to rest." Linda hesitated. "Do you need anything? Medicine? Food?" "No, I'm fine." Her mother's footsteps retreated. Priscilla closed her eyes. For the next few days, Priscilla existed in a fog. She went through the motions, barely present, barely alive. She avoided Thomas, avoided her mother, avoided everyone. She stopped going to class, stopped going to work. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from Casey, from her boss, from her professors. She ignored them all. Linda started to notice. "What's going on with you?" she asked one evening, her voice laced with concern. "You've been acting strange. Are you depressed? Do you need to see a doctor?" Priscilla wanted to scream. She wanted to tell her mother everything, wanted to shake her and make her see what was happening under their own roof. But the words wouldn't come. Because what if Linda didn't believe her? What if she blamed Priscilla? What if she chose Thomas over her own daughter? Priscilla had seen it before, read about it, heard stories. Mothers who didn't believe, who couldn't accept, who turned their backs. So instead, Priscilla just shook her head. "I'm fine, just tired." 2 weeks after that night, Priscilla made a decision. She couldn't stay in that house anymore. She couldn't breathe there, couldn't think, couldn't survive. She needed to leave. She started looking for apartments, cheap studios, anything she could afford on her part-time salary. She found a tiny place about 20 minutes away, a rundown efficiency in a not great neighborhood, but it was hers. She signed the lease, gave her first and last month's rent, and started packing her things. She didn't tell her mother, didn't tell anyone. She just packed, quietly, methodically, waiting for the right moment. That moment came on a Saturday afternoon. Linda and Thomas had gone to some work event, wouldn't be back until late. Priscilla loaded everything she could fit into her car, 2 trips worth, and left. She didn't leave a note, didn't say goodbye, just locked the door behind her and drove away. Her mother called that night, frantic. "Where are you? What's going on?" Priscilla's voice was calm, detached. "I moved out. I needed my own space." Linda was stunned. "What? Why? What happened?" "Nothing happened. I just need to be on my own for a while." "Priscilla, this doesn't make sense. Did we do something? Did I do something?" Priscilla closed her eyes. "No, Mom, I didn't do anything. I need to do this." Linda tried to argue, tried to convince her to come back, but Priscilla hung up. She turned off her phone and sat in her empty apartment, surrounded by boxes, and finally, for the first time in weeks, she cried. The months that followed were some of the darkest of Priscilla's life. She withdrew completely. She stopped going to school, stopped seeing her friends, stopped answering calls or texts. She worked just enough to pay her bills, then came home and locked herself inside her tiny apartment. She barely ate, barely slept. The nightmares were relentless, vivid, suffocating. She'd wake up gasping, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding, convinced she was back in that house, back in that hallway. The trauma burrowed deep inside her, a constant, gnawing presence that colored everything. She felt dirty, broken, like a part of her had been ripped away and she'd never get it back.
Her mother kept calling, kept texting, begging Priscilla to talk to her, to explain what was going on. But Priscilla couldn't. The distance between them grew wider with each unanswered call, until eventually Linda stopped trying. That silence hurt more than anything. It confirmed what Priscilla had feared all along. She was alone. One day, about 4 months after she'd moved out, Priscilla's supervisor at work pulled her aside. Her name was Angela, a kind woman in her 50s who'd always treated Priscilla with patience and warmth. "Hey," Angela said gently, "can we talk for a minute?" Priscilla nodded, her stomach knotting with anxiety. They stepped into the back office, away from the bustle of the store. Angela studied her for a moment, her eyes soft with concern. "I'm worried about you, Priscilla. You've been different, distant, and I've noticed you've lost weight. Are you okay?" Priscilla's throat tightened. She wanted to say yes, to brush it off, to protect herself with the same walls she'd built around everyone else. But something in Angela's eyes, something genuine and caring, broke through. "I don't know," Priscilla whispered, and her voice cracked. Angela didn't push. She just waited, giving Priscilla space. "If something's going on," Angela said carefully, "if you need help, there are people who can help. Counselors, therapists, support groups. You don't have to go through whatever this is alone." Priscilla looked down at her hands. "I don't know how to talk about it." Angela nodded. "That's okay. You don't have to talk about it right now. But when you're ready, there are people who will listen. I can help you find someone if you want." Priscilla didn't respond right away, but later that night, lying awake in her apartment, Angela's words echoed in her mind. Maybe she didn't have to carry this alone. Maybe there was a way out of the darkness. A few days later, Priscilla called the number Angela had given her. It was a community counseling center, sliding scale fees for people who couldn't afford much. She made an appointment, and the following week she found herself sitting in a small, quiet office across from a woman named Dr. Patel. Dr. Patel was calm, patient, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. She didn't push, didn't pry, just asked simple questions. "What brought you here today?" Priscilla's hands shook as she tried to find the words. "Something happened to me," she finally said, her voice barely audible. "And I don't know how to deal with it." Dr. Patel nodded. "Can you tell me about it? Only if you're comfortable." Priscilla hesitated. The words felt too big, too heavy, too real. But slowly, haltingly, she began to speak. She told Dr. Patel about Thomas, about the discomfort, the fear, the night everything changed. She told her about moving out, about the nightmares, about the numbness that had swallowed her whole. And as she spoke, something inside her began to crack open. All the pain and shame she'd been holding in, pouring out. Dr. Patel listened without judgment, without interruption. When Priscilla finished, her face was wet with tears, her body trembling. "I'm so sorry that happened to you. What you experienced was a trauma, and it's not your fault. None of it is your fault." Those words, simple as they were, felt like a lifeline. For the first time since that night, Priscilla felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't broken beyond repair. Over the next several months, Priscilla continued seeing Dr. Patel. Therapy was hard, brutal at times, forcing her to confront memories and emotions she'd buried deep. But slowly, painfully, she began to heal. Dr. Patel helped her understand that what had happened to her wasn't just uncomfortable or wrong. It was abuse. It was a crime. And she wasn't alone. Dr. Patel introduced Priscilla to a survivor support group, a small gathering of women who met once a week in a church basement. Priscilla was terrified the first time she went, convinced she wouldn't belong, that her story wasn't bad enough, that they'd judge her.
But when she walked into that room and heard other women share their stories, stories so similar to her own, she realized she'd found something she'd been missing for so long. She'd found people who understood. One woman, a soft-spoken girl named Maya, who couldn't have been older than 21, shared how her uncle had abused her for years and how her family refused to believe her when she finally told them. Another woman, an older lady named Ruth, talked about surviving decades of abuse from her ex-husband and finally finding the courage to leave. Each story was different, but the pain was the same. The shame was the same. The silence was the same. And sitting in that circle, listening to these women speak their truths, Priscilla felt something shift inside her. She wasn't alone.